Chapter 17, Call to Arms. There is a room in the mind fortress that only lights up when everything else has failed. It sits in the shadow of the tower, deliberately removed from gardens, libraries, courts, and conversation. You don't wander into this place. You don't stumble across it by accident. It doesn't invite curiosity, reflection, or debate. It answers one question only. Is this a threat? This is the war room. A vast hall of black stone, scorched and scarred, built for inevitability. One long table dominates the center, not decorative, not symbolic, functional, cold, brutally precise. Its surface is etched with battle lines, contingencies, fallback positions, exit routes, pressure points. Some are physical, some are linguistic, some are emotional, some are reputational. All are mapped. The walls are not adorned with art, they're lined with trophies, medals of survival, fragments of past conflicts, broken arguments, shattered egos, names that no longer matter, proof that battles were fought and won at a cost, not celebrated, not mourned, documented. There are weapons here too, not just fists and blades, but words sharpened into tools, silence forged into armor, withdrawal polished into a shield, rage kept on standby, contempt sheathed but reachable. There are strategies hanging in the air like old smoke, reminders of what worked when nothing else did. This room is not governed by morality. It is governed by survival. The ones who gather here are not subtle. They don't debate ethics. They don't ask why. They ask how fast. These are the warlords, the tacticians, the brutal pragmatists, the versions of Danny that learned early that hesitation gets punished, that respect is not always given. Sometimes it has to be taken. They are blood aware, outcome driven, impatient with nuance. They will always choose war, not because they love it, but because they trust it. They don't listen to the court. They barely tolerate the maze. Faith, philosophy, humor, compassion, all of it gets stripped away here. This room exists for moments when diplomacy has already failed or never had a chance to begin. When the call to arms sounds, it is not emotional, it is automatic, a reflex built over years of pattern recognition, a system that activates when vibration shifts from uncertainty to hostility, when intent sharpens, when something moves from conversation to collision. Danny doesn't summon this room, the room summons itself. Externally, he may look calm, detached, cold, even distracted. Internally, the table fills. Every past role that knows how to fight takes their place. Every version that survives something ugly stands ready. The dragon does not roar here, it calculates. There is no surrender protocol, no negotiation clause. Once engaged, the objective is simple. Neutralize the threat, by words if possible, by distance if necessary, by force if unavoidable. This is not cruelty. This is containment. Because if the war room did not exist, those instincts would spill everywhere, into conversations, into relationships, into places they do not belong. This hall exists so the violence has a boundary, so the fire knows where to burn, and if somehow even this fails, if the dragon is overwhelmed, if the war council is outmatched, if something breaches deeper than it ever should, then there is no meeting, no debate, no appeal. Something else stirs far below. But that is not a story for this chapter. This is the call to arms. And once it sounds, nothing and no one moves alone. Before this room existed, before it had walls, a table, rules, and a threshold, there was only overflow. There was no separation between impulse and action, no containment between instinct and expression. When threat appeared, it didn't get processed, it spilled. Rage didn't have a chamber to report to, so it burst out wherever it was triggered. Anger didn't wait for strategy, it reacted. Fear didn't brief anyone, it panicked. Pride didn't confer with consequence, it struck first. Words became weapons without aim. Silence became a blade swung blindly. Withdrawal became abandonment. Attack became self-sabotage. That's where the spontaneous explosions came from. Not cruelty, not malice, not desire to harm. Uncontained defense. When you don't give a dragon a place to plan, it burns whatever is closest. The war room exists because of that history, because too many battles were fought everywhere, in conversations, in relationships, in moments that should have stayed small. Because without a designated space for aggression, every room became one. Every interaction became a front line. Every disagreement felt existential. So the system adapted. Now when pressure rises, when the vibration tips from discomfort to threat, the response doesn't leak outward immediately. It routes inward. The instincts are summoned, not unleashed. And the ones who gather here are not subtle parts of the psyche. They are the ones forged under pressure. Anger stands first, not screaming, not flailing, but coiled, focused, ready to move when told. Rage is there too, but restrained now, chained to purpose instead of impulse. Fear doesn't run here, it reports, it points, it highlights risks. Panic is present but silenced unless things escalate beyond control. Aggression sharpens options. Dominance assesses posture and hierarchy. Pride scans for disrespect. Contempt evaluates whether the target deserves engagement at all. Then come the instincts that don't feel like emotions but functions. Territoriality, boundary enforcement, threat assessment, escalation control, exit strategy. Hypervigilance watches the doors. Survival instinct keeps time. Reflex calculates speed. Impulse is leashed, not removed, because it's still needed, just no longer trusted alone. This is the difference. Before, rage was the plan. Now rage is one vote. Before, anger decided outcomes by volume. Now, anger must justify itself. The war room doesn't make Danny more violent. It makes him less reckless. Because when the call to arms is answered here, it means the decision has already passed through containment. The damage is intentional, not accidental. The response is measured, not reactive. The fire is directed. And most importantly, when the room is quiet, when no one is seated at a table, that fire stays dormant. Which is why, to people on the outside, the shift feels dramatic. They remember the overflow. They expect the spill. They brace for the explosion. What they don't see is the architecture. They don't see that the chaos has been given a room so it doesn't infect the rest of the fortress. They don't see that the dragon didn't disappear. He learned how to stand still until it mattered. And then there is him, not arriving late, not storming in last, not shouting over the table to be heard. The ego king is already there. He doesn't sit because he needs to be told what to do. He sits because everything in this room exists for him. This is the part most people misunderstand about ego. They think it's vanity, noise, overcompensation, posturing. Here, it's authority. The ego king is the one who decides whether the war room is defensive or offensive, whether the table is used to hold the line or cross it, whether this is about protecting territory or expanding it. Because this room does both. The ego doesn't invent threats, it interprets meaning. It decides what matters, what counts as disrespect, what is worth blood, words, or silence. Without him, the room would be pure reaction, a riot of instincts pulling in different directions. With him, the instincts align around identity. This is who we are. This is where we stand. This is what we will not tolerate. The ego king listens, yes, but not humbly. He listens like a ruler listens to generals, weighing usefulness, not feelings. Rage might demand annihilation. Fear might argue retreat. Pride might want a public display. Strategy might call for patience. And the ego decides which of those actions still lets him stand upright afterward. Because that's the real metric here. Not morality. Not kindness. Not even safety. Dignity. The ego king exists to ensure Danny does not survive a conflict only to lose himself in the aftermath. So when the room leans toward attack, it is the ego that asks, will this strengthen us or just prove a point? And when the room leans toward defense, it asks, are we holding the line or shrinking out of fear? This is why the room can turn violent or restrained without contradiction, because both are tools. Sometimes the ego commands restraint, not because he is gentle, but because the opponent isn't worth elevation. Sometimes he orders attack not because he is angry, but because failing to respond would erode authority permanently. That's dragon psychology refined by Capricorn discipline. Power that knows when to move, power that knows when not to. And when the ego king stands, when he places his hands on the table and the room goes quiet, it doesn't mean chaos is coming. It means decision is. Defend or attack, hold or advance. Speak or burn. The room exists so that when that order is given, it is intentional, not overflow, not accident, not regret. When the Crimson Court hands authority to the war room, it does not mean one thing. It means one of two conditions has been met. And the distinction matters, because the fortress does not respond to every threat the same way. Preparing for siege, external threat state. A siege is declared when the threat is external. Someone or something is approaching the walls. Pressure is being applied from the outside. Boundaries are being tested, poked, eroded, or outright challenged. This is not confusion. This is not internal collapse. This is an incoming force. When siege is declared, troops are mobilized, defenses are reinforced, positions are taken, lines are drawn. The War Council assembles with clarity. This is where dragon energy thrives. Aggression is justified, rage is sharpened, confidence hardens into resolve. The goal is simple: hold the walls. This is when Danny becomes unyielding on the outside, when he plants his feet, when he refuses to negotiate further. Siege is not impulsive, it is defiant endurance. Capricorn discipline ensures the defense is sustained. Dragon dominance ensures no ground is given. The message is clear. Open quote, "You are not getting in," close quote. Martial law, internal threat state. Martial law is something else entirely. Martial law is declared inside the fortress. This happens when something breaches containment internally. A trauma response, a resurfaced memory, a psychological fracture, a monster dragged up from the depths before it's understood. This is not an enemy at the gate. This is a fire in the corridors. When martial law is enacted, normal governance is suspended. Emotional democracy is overridden. Access between internal systems is restricted. Silence replaces dialogue. This is lockdown. Not to punish, to prevent spread. The court does not debate. The maze is bypassed. The tower closes its doors. The war room intervenes because something has manifested that cannot yet be reasoned with. A beast without language. A reaction without context. A force born of trauma, confusion, or unresolved pain. And when the court cannot identify what it is, cannot place it, cannot understand its purpose, it is attacked and suppressed, not destroyed, contained, beaten down until it can be isolated, dragged deeper if necessary, locked away until the system is stable enough to face it. This is not cruelty. This is self-preservation. Why this matters? Psychologically, past impulsive rage came from overflow. The war room didn't exist yet as a formal structure. Pressure had nowhere to go, so it exploded outward. Now it doesn't. Now there is a protocol. Siege protects the fortress from external harm. Martial law protects the system from internal collapse. One is defense, the other is containment. One faces outward, the other turns inward. Both are necessary, both are dangerous, and both are only activated when the Crimson Court decides that normal processing has failed. This is not Danny losing control. This is the system doing exactly what it was built to do: survive when understanding is not yet possible. And when the threat, external or internal, is neutralized, martial law is lifted, the siege ends, the war room stands down, and the slow work of meaning, reflection, and repair begins. But only after the fortress is safe. The aftermath isn't just an ending, it's a phase. On the outside, it looks simple enough for anyone watching. A line crossed, a bridge burned so thoroughly there's no pretending it ever stood. Dragonfire, unmistakable, undeniable, heat, force, finality. Words delivered with precision sharp enough to cauterize whatever was left alive. From the external, it looks like anger won, like Danny snapped, like impulse took the wheel. That's the lie of the surface. Inside, there is no snap. Inside, Danny isn't raging, he's surveying. He stands at the edge of the newly formed battlefield, the smoke still lifting in slow, reluctant spirals. The ground is blackened, cracked, uninhabitable. Standards lie fallen, not just theirs, but his too. Pieces of himself are scattered out there alongside whatever came at the walls. He exhales. Not relief, not regret, something heavier. Because he knows what this place is now. Another conflict that didn't make it to words. Another situation that never earned the maze. Another proof that force was the only language available, and that knowledge carries weight. This is where people misunderstand him the most. They think the fire is indulgence. They think it's cathartic. They think it feels good. It doesn't. It feels necessary, and necessity is never clean. Inside, he replays it not as emotion, but as sequence. What tone shifted first? What signal was ignored? Where respect failed? Which instinct was triggered? When escalation became inevitable? Not to punish himself, but to map it. Because every battlefield becomes reference material. This one gets embedded into the terrain, added to the archive of places he will one day walk again, when memory softens and reflection sharpens. When empathy comes back online and asks its quiet, uncomfortable questions. Did this have to happen? Was there another route? Was the damage proportional? Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is yes. Both answers stay. And while all this is happening internally, externally, Danny looks flat, tired eyes, short sentences, minimal expression. If you ask him, he'll tell you he's fine. And in a way, he is. Because fine doesn't mean calm, it means contained. The war room has already gone quiet. The call to arms has been stood down, no siege alarms ringing, no internal lockdown humming, but the cost has been logged. That's why, after the fire, he often goes distant instead of louder. Because the dragon isn't hunting anymore, it's counting casualties. Not just theirs, his. Every battle takes something, even the justified ones, especially the justified ones, and Danny knows this. That's why the battlefield isn't a place of pride, it's a place of remembrance, a reminder of strength, a reminder of danger, a reminder that the system works, but never without consequence. He turns away eventually. He always does, not because he's done, but because staring too long risks turning reflection into self-destruction. The battlefield will still be there. It always is. Waiting for the day he walks it again, calmer, slower, when the lesson it holds finally finishes forming. Until then, the dragon carries on, quieter, heavier, still standing. Back in the war room, after the fire has gone out, after the battlefield has fallen silent, something else happens that almost no one ever sees. The chaos collapses inward. All those voices that screamed, demanded action, they don't stay separate. They recombine. Rage stops pacing. Fear lowers its weapon. Panic finally shuts up. Suspicion releases its grip. Jealousy, resentment, bitterness, contempt, all of them bleed back into something denser, heavier, quieter. The room empties. What remains are only a few figures, seated around the table like veterans after a campaign. Pride sits upright, armor still warm, surveying the outcome. Not boastful, measured, the kind of pride that says we held the line. Relief exhales, finally allowed to exist now the threat is gone. Confidence settles in, steadier now, reinforced by proof rather than bravado. They don't celebrate loudly. They bask briefly in the confirmation that the system worked. That's it. No victory parade, no cheering, because deeper in the room, where the light doesn't reach, he's still there. Not joy, not vitality, not innocence, not sadness. Those versions of Danny exist elsewhere, in other rooms, under other conditions. This one belongs here. In the shadows, leaning against the stone, arms folded, is anger. Not the explosive kind, not the shouting kind, but the integrated version. The one that contains everything. All the rage, all the restraint, all the memory, all the violence that didn't get used, all the violence that did. This is the Danny that the war room ultimately answers to. Not because he shouts the loudest, but because when all other emotions burn out, he's the one still standing. He doesn't gloat. He doesn't rest. He watches. Because this version knows something the others don't. There will be another fight. Not today, not necessarily tomorrow, but eventually. And when it comes, pride will rise, confidence will stiffen, relief will disappear instantly. And anger, the composed, cold, fully assembled anger, will step forward again, carrying the weight of every previous battle inside him. Not to start wars, but to finish them. This is why the war room never truly sleeps, and why Danny, even in moments of calm, is never entirely unarmed. And even here, especially here, the moon is present, not as an interruption, not as a counterweight trying to calm the room, not as a voice raised against the fire. She is present because she always is. From her position, she sees everything, every plan drawn across the table, every instinct leaning forward, every calculated escalation, every moment where annihilation is considered not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. She sees it all, understands it all, and in her way, forgives it all. Not by excusing it, but by comprehending why it exists. And the lunar ghost, who is not separate from the moon, but her presence made manifest, is in the room. She does not dominate the war council. She does not command it. She does not redirect it. She watches. And there is something unmistakable in that watching. Not fear, not concern, not judgment, recognition. She sees the dominance for what it is, the readiness, the preparedness, the willingness to shoulder responsibility no one else wants. She looks at the dragon in this state, decisive, focused, dangerous. And there is admiration there, respect, almost lust, not in a shallow sense, but in the way one recognizes power that knows exactly what it is doing. She doesn't ask him to stand down. She doesn't try to soften the edges. She doesn't flinch at the intent. She understands it, and because she understands it, she doesn't need to speak. Her presence alone changes the room. Because now, Every instinct, every emotion, every strategic voice on that council is aware that she is watching, that her perspective matters, that her experience of the outcome matters, that if this were the external world, if this were a real bond, a real partner, a real soulmate, then her presence would be factored into every decision without her ever having to demand it. And the echo? The echo does not argue either. It does not shout. It does not override. It does not oppose. It resonates. It matches the tone of the room, the reasoning, the justification, the why. The echo carries the same war cry, the same internal logic, the same understanding of when to stand ground and when to burn a path through. It is not there to escalate. It is there to align. And that is the distinction. Because if Danny were ever to meet someone who truly belonged here, truly matched him, it would not be someone who tried to talk him out of this room, not someone who demanded peace where preparedness was required, not someone who mistook dominance for cruelty or planning for malice. It would be someone who could stand beside him here, not fighting him, not calming him, not correcting him, but understanding him. Someone who could walk the battlefield with him and stand at the table during planning. Someone who could hear the call to arms and not panic. Someone who could witness the fire and still choose him. Someone whose presence did not invite annihilation, but prevented it. Because with the moon in the room, total destruction is never the goal. The sun will always protect the moon. The moon will always cool the sun. That balance matters. Her presence means there will still be conflict, arguments, friction, disagreement, because that is human, that is real. But it will never descend into scorched earth annihilation, never into mutual destruction, never into burning something sacred just to win. Because the moon does not need to be defended from the dragon. She is what the dragon fights for. And with her seated there, silent, watching, understood, even empires would fail to keep a dragon from returning to his moon. Not through force, but through gravity. And this is the part that often gets missed. Because when people see this side of Danny, the preparedness, the sharpness, the dominance, the readiness to burn bridges without hesitation, they assume that this is the whole system. It isn't. This is one room, an essential one, a dangerous one, a necessary one, but not the entirety of him. This is the room that exists because he has learned repeatedly that the world does not always arrive gently, that some problems cannot be talked through, that some threats don't announce themselves politely, that sometimes the only thing standing between survival and collapse is speed, force, and decisiveness. Dragon Capricorn psychology doesn't default to chaos, it defaults to preparedness. The war room exists so that rage has containment, so that violence has planning, so that anger doesn't spill blindly into every corridor of the fortress. Without it, the fire leaks everywhere. And yes, this room explains the bluntness, the short temper, the sudden withdrawal, the scorched aftermath that leaves people stunned on the outside while Danny, internally, is already surveying the damage and asking, what did we learn? But it would be a mistake, a fundamental one, to think this is all there is. Because this fortress was not built only for war. There are other places entirely, places where humor disarms instead of attacks, where knowledge replaces instinct, where faith steadies rather than escalates, where curiosity wanders instead of hunts. There is a tavern where laughter exists purely to survive the weight of existence, a library where answers are sought instead of enemies, a hill where belief isn't about certainty, but about meaning, gardens where nothing needs defending at all. The war room is loud because it has to be. The rest of the fortress is quieter and deeper. And the truth is, Danny doesn't live here. He only comes here when something has gone wrong, or when something might. The fire is real. The dragon is real. But so is everything else. And understanding that, truly understanding it, is the difference between fearing the system and recognizing it as survival engineering. Because this was never about being violent. It was about making sure that when violence is unavoidable, it is contained, directed, and temporary. And once the fire has done its job, Danny leaves the room. The doors close, and the fortress breathes again.